Welcome everyone to this webinar on fresh fruit and vegetables. It will be, as I said, I'm trying to respect everyone's times, so it will be around an hour, 55 minutes. So the structure of the webinar will be, I first will talk about Open Trade Gate Sweden, which I am part of. So I will start with me. I will talk about Open Trade Gate Sweden and the National Board of Trade shortly. And then I will have the person who written the market report, Warner, who will from Globally Cool, who will talk a little bit more about the Swedish market for fresh fruit and vegetables. So yeah. And all the sort of questions, I will sort of try to write them in the questions. There's supposed to be a questions and answers chat as well. So please write all the questions there, and I'll try to answer them as best as I can, and we'll take them at the end as well. But first of all, we have Open Trade Gate Sweden, which is where I'm part of. We're part of the National Board of Trade, which is a government organization here in Sweden. Who works with the EU internal market, trade policy, and us at Open Trade Gate Sweden, we work with cooperation development. And on this slide here, you can see all the different areas that we work in. And Open Trade Gate Sweden goes under the development corporation. So we at Open Trade Gate Sweden, we facilitate trade from developing economies to Sweden and the EU. We're funded by Swedish development aid, and all of our services are free of charge. And then we have two sort of functions. We work at point of contact, which this is the sort of webinars, market studies, and the OTG's mailbox that some of you might have found. And then secondarily, we have the capacity building part as well. So as I said, first we have the point of contact. We talk about, I always call it that we are a one-stop shop for sort of import promotion to Sweden. So we promote import to Sweden from the developing countries, basically, or developing companies and countries. So we work that with people write into us through our mailbox, and then from there we sort of refer them to the correct sort of government agency, public authority, market experts, or sort of also sort of cooperation between export organizations and exporters in these developing countries as well. As I said, we also do market studies, and this is the reason we do this webinar. It's not the webinar itself would not be a sort of a summary of the market study. This was more be a presentation of the Swedish market in general and how it functions. So we have market studies in various different fields. One of the fields is fresh fruit and vegetables. We have in superfoods, we have in IT, we have a bunch of few IT sectors and sort of subsectors that we have as well. And we have in textiles. So those are the three markets that we work in an Open Trade Gate Sweden. We work with food, IT, and textiles, the three markets that we work in. So those are really, really relevant, and they focus on the sort of Swedish market for this sector. So it's sort of guided towards the Swedish sector and Swedish market as well, to learn more about it. Then we have a really, really useful tool as well online on the website. It's called Road to Export. You'll find it under Open Trade Gate Sweden. They have Road to Export, which is sort of a step-by-step guide a little bit on how to export. It gives you really, really concrete advice on what your next step is when it comes to exporting, and also where in the exporting journey you are, what sort of factors, what sort of different things that you need to look at, or maybe you feel like so you have these are the headlines as well online that we have. It's everything from classification to how to find a business partner in Sweden. And so those sort of steps between as well. So if you haven't looked at it before, I recommend that you go in and you look at that as well. Road to Expert under Open Trade Gate Sweden is really, really useful. And yes. And then we have the secondary sort of part of our organization, Open Trade Gate Sweden. We have the building capacity or capacity building. So in there, we work in more of long-term projects. We do pre-phase studies for a specific country to check what sort of matches that can be made between this country and maybe in the food sector and Sweden, if there's a sort of market there. and in that case, where the sort of products that are interesting. And when we sort of identify that, we can go forward to building capacity with a local partner in this respective country. We give everything from sort of legal requirements to market information and also how to find a buyer. So we give them a little bit, as I said, it's a capacity building. So we give this sort of information to the companies, we coach them, we mentor them a little bit and give them sort of information for them to be able to find their way into the Swedish market. Because it's not like all other markets, it is a little bit differently. So we use, as a Open Tree Sweden, we use a lot of our information that we know and to sort of coach and help. And then sometimes we usually take them maybe on trade fairs to see a little bit on what we can do to increase their chances of getting exposed in the Swedish market as well. An example of the projects that we have, I'm taking an example just because this is one of the projects I'm involved with, is Trade Academy Trade Promotion. And this project is where we coach or we give information to BSOs or business support organizations, export promotion organizations in developing countries. So we only work with developing countries, and these BSOs, or export promotion agencies, we give them sort of information and give them coaching on how to a little bit how the Swedish market works and what they can learn from Swedish market as well, and also help them in coaching their own companies in the respective countries. So we give them sort of a little bit of training so they can then take this information and sort of give it forward to the companies in the country itself that they work with every single day. I'm going to give very shortly a little bit about what we did in 2024 and also what we did in 2025. So the idea is in 2025, I'll start with 2024, where we have a focus on Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, and Armenia. Now in 2024, these sort of countries are given to us from our sort of government, but we're looking into expanding and looking at new sort of countries and sort of new markets in those countries as well. We have ongoing projects in Ukraine, Moldova, and Bolivia. In Bolivia is now, we just canceled it, or sort of, we end it now at 2024. And we also have a project in Georgia as well. As I said, the Trade Academy Trade Promotion, we did this year, and we will do it again next year. It'll be focused on primarily Eastern Europe, but it could be some other sort of developing countries there as well. In 2024, we also were present at SIAL with companies from Ukraine, Bolivia, and Moldova at the world's largest food fair, together with our German counterpart, IPD, Import Promotion Desk, to sort of help them get into the Swedish and the European market and find purchases there. So this is one of those activities I talked about when it comes to capacity building. And lastly, we did a point of contact, we did market reports, webinars, and web pages just like this, basically. And this is us. We are right now 6 people. And if you want to get in touch with us, you see the email at the top, otgs@kommerskollegium.se. That's the general email, which I'm in charge of. So if you have any questions or anything, you can write to that email as well. Otherwise, you have the sort of my own direct email as well there as well. I think that's everything from me. Werner, I think we'll be handing it over to you.
Yes. Good day, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on exporting fresh fruits and vegetables to Sweden and the European Union. I'm Werner, and today we'll explore the Swedish market, including main trends, market structure, requirements, along with some practical tips to help you succeed in enter the Swedish market. So let's begin. Sweden's consumer spending on fruits and vegetables has grown considerably in the long term since 2016, which reflects a health-conscious trend with people eating more fresh fruits and vegetables. However, since 2021, inflation came in. Inflation really affected sales from 2021 to 2023. But the good thing is that we see now a recovery with a 3.3% increase in grocery sales for fresh produce in 2024. So the market is rebounding a little bit, which is, of course, very positive news looking into the short-term future. If we take a look into Sweden's import profile, then it's obvious Sweden really depends on imports for fresh produce. Every year, almost 1 million tons is imported to Sweden. And the figure shows that the largest part of Swedish imports is from intra-European sources, which is imports from, for example, Germany, Netherlands, Spain. This involves local European produced fruits and vegetables, but also re-exports from other countries, such as the Netherlands. The graph also clearly shows that the imports went down in 2023. Imports definitely slowed, but the interesting thing is the yellow part of the bar remains more or less equal, which means that the imports from developing countries have remained stable. If you calculate it on the total, then this comes down to a growth in the import share for developing countries, reaching 24% in 2023. And that is equal to a volume of 215,000 tons. This visual shows the top 5 products imported from developing countries for Sweden and the rest of Europe. For example, 74% of the Swedish import volume is bananas, which is the first line with the Swedish flag. It means that 74% of the 215,000 tons is bananas from developing countries. And then you have oranges in the second place, apples, mandarins, and potatoes. What is striking here is that the share of tomatoes, pineapple, and avocados to Sweden, directly imported by Sweden, is relatively low. Because these products are in the line for the European Union, top 5 products. Further, for the main origins, maybe you are interested in that information. Bananas mainly come from Ecuador, Colombia. Oranges come from Egypt, South Africa also. Apples from South Africa and Ukraine. Mandarins from Morocco, and potatoes from Egypt. Then, if we zoom in on the supplying countries, then we see this table where Sweden is on the left side and rest of Europe is on the right side. The volumes displayed are in 1,000 tons, and CAGR stands for compound annual growth rate, so the average annual growth rate in the period 2019-2023. On the left side, you see the top 10 list of suppliers to Sweden. And you can also see that if you compare Sweden and the rest of Europe, the products overlap a bit, and the suppliers also, but there are also some clear differences. And what is mostly striking here is that Sweden's imports are less diversified. If you calculate the volume of Morocco, the number 10 exported to Sweden, by the volume of the number 1, that is 6% share, while for Europe, that is 19%. So you see that in Sweden, only very few developing countries contribute to the large share of imports from developing countries. Further, also, what is striking is that Swedish banana imports from Nicaragua, the Dominican Republic, Panama, and Ecuador are relatively strong, while at the same time, Sweden hardly imports any fresh fruit and vegetables from the 3 countries, Peru, Brazil, and Cote d'Ivoire. So then if we talk about seasonality, so the imports within a year, we can definitely say seasonality also offers opportunities in the Swedish market. This is the example of oranges. The figure shows Swedish imports of oranges in tons per month from European origin, which is the blue part, and non-European origin, which is the yellow part. So you can say that every year between November and May, reflected by the 1, so the peaks, the pyramids in the figure, the oranges come from Spain. And in the so-called off-season, the oranges come from the other part of the world, the southern part. And that is in practice South Africa in this case. We have another nice example for the seasonality that offers opportunities also for cucumbers. Cucumbers, you can see here the graph displaying the imports to Sweden of cucumbers throughout the year, by month and by supplying country. And the local supply in this case means the locally produced, Swedish produced cucumbers, which are taking place identified in the graph. In the times when there's no local supply, the imports go up. And then in the first place, imports from Spain, also Netherlands and Germany contribute. But what is also interesting to see is that in the off-season, also Jordan exports the cucumbers to Sweden. So this is an example of for cucumbers where the developing country Jordan benefits from the off-season opportunities. So next, if we look at the market structure, you can see the 3 main segments, which is food retail, food service, and the food processing industry. And then if you look at the Swedish map, it's interesting to see that the fresh fruits and vegetables enter Sweden in the south of the country, in the city Helsingborg. So that is the hub. The food retail is the most evident segment, the most visual segment in the market, with the food retail outlets with the fruit and vegetable sections, which is displayed in the graph, the picture on the right side. There are in total more than 3,000 food retail outlets, but most of these are well, it's not about, but most of them are part of three market leaders, which are ICA, X-Food, and Coop. Together, they are good for 80% of the market, and their total sales is 27 billion euro. If you look at the sales of the fresh fruits and vegetables, that is about 5.2 billion, and that is 20% of the total value. Then food service. This involves companies that are wholesalers that supply to hotels, restaurants, and catering. They don't have outlets in the case of Sweden so much, so there are no cash and carry outlets. But the players here that are listed, Martin and Severa, Menigo, and Svensk Cater, they have warehouses and they have a distribution network where they supply restaurants and hotels directly. Their websites of these food service players offer valuable information. The websites offer a selection menu, so you can search in their assortment. You can select in the first place that you are looking for chilled products, but a very interesting element is also the country of origin. So you can select the country of origin and see which products come from that country. This is another print screen of the website, and now I highlight the sustainable choice. This is, for me, it reflects the importance of sustainability for these companies. So Swedish buyers, mention a Swedish restaurant or hotel, they can tick the box of sustainable choice, and then they get the products that have the label sustainable choice. In practice, it means that sustainable choice is a locally produced product, whether in Sweden or in Europe. And also the climate score is also attached to the product. So that helps buyers to make a balanced choice. This is another print screen of the supplier, the company Menigo. They have the carbon footprint displayed, which is shown, highlighted by the green arrow. The carbon footprint for each product is listed. So if buyers are interested, they can select on the carbon footprint too. Then we have the third segment, which is industrial segment, and that is covered by fresh juice producers. We have fruit salad producers, and also some importers of fresh fruits and vegetables have also developed a fresh production branch. And in this industrial segment, the main players are Bramhult and Raysaft, which both produce the fresh juice, basically. What is an important characteristic of this segment is that the packaging for this industrial segment is more in bulk or large volumes, which you can see here. So there are big boxes of 800 to 1000 kg, maybe a little bit less than 800, some 600. But this is obviously different from the food service and food retail markets. So then now the big question, how to get your product into the Swedish market. There are 3 different steps. Well, one is to have your focus right. Focus on the importers of fresh products. There are several names displayed on this sheet. Each company is unique in terms of products, in terms of origins, and activities. You can see there's ICA, that is a dedicated buyer for the ICA retailer. You have Bama, who's focusing on ready-cut salads. But Fruit Connect, for example, is specialized in citrus fruit. But they all import fresh products from developing countries in the basis. These websites, by the way, offer great information on the products and the activities they offer, but also on the products and the origins, like the example on this slide for daily greens, where you can see the seedless grapes come from and when they come from countries. So 1 was to focus on importers. 2 is to anticipate trends. And then a very important trend in the Swedish market is sustainability. Sweden has become an important market for sustainably produced fruits and vegetables. Sweden is the 6th largest importer of organic agri-food products within Europe. And okay, the 6th largest position, it may not be shocking, but Sweden, if you imagine that Sweden is definitely not the number 6 importer of fresh fruits and vegetables, and because it's not considered a top 6 market, even not a top 10. For sustainably produced fruits and vegetables, it is. And although within organic market there is a preference for local origin, as you also saw on the slide of the food service distributor, who had the sustainable choice option. So although there's a preference for local, obviously many fresh products can be produced locally, so they need to be imported. And for that reason, it's not surprising that Swedish importers also pay considerable attention to sustainability. So they might have a fair trade certificate, which is shown on the left side, or they are into other initiatives, like with bananas, with the Smile project for bananas in Sweden, which you can also read about in the report that we've recently updated. Sustainability is a requirement, has become a requirement. And although the definition of what sustainability really means is not always clear, in general, there are 2 focus areas, which are environmental requirements and the ethical social side. So you have 2 sides of the coin, and you will come across these requirements through codes of conduct. In the first place, there's an example here, a link. Certifications, which can be fair trade certification, which is definitely the case for bananas. And additionally, also importers report a lot about their sustainability efforts. And that's what we're going to see on the next slide, where the company Dole, or the branch, the Swedish branch, where they explain their sustainability story, and they elaborate on all the three main pillars, and all the elements within these pillars and the actions they've taken there to improve their sustainability. So it's really important to be aware of that and to also act proactively there to improve your chances in the Swedish market. Then, if you want to get your product to the Swedish market, you need to make sure that your product complies. So in the first place, the Swedish legal requirements are in line with European requirements. They are more or less the same. And because Sweden is a member of the European Union. Secondly, for fresh produce, the benchmark certification is Global GAP. This is for fresh produce. If you talk about fresh pre-cut, there are a little bit more requirements. Then you are very likely required to have a food safety management system based on HACCP principles. And that has to do with the microbiological contamination risk. For fresh produce, the phytosanitary certificate is mandatory for most products. You need to carefully consider and manage the maximum residue levels for pesticides and some other contaminants, heavy metals, for example. And this is really, can be really a struggle. Then the labeling is also an issue. It must be accurate, clear, and certainly consumer-facing labels for pre-packed cut fruit. They need to be in Swedish for the Swedish market. So then, okay, next step, if you are ready to find a business partner and your product matches, how to find the right business partner. That's a very interesting question, of course. Sweden is not that big of a market with its own dedicated fruit and vegetable trade fairs. So you're more likely to go to European trade fairs or global trade fairs that are Fruit Logistica, which is in Germany every year. You have Fruit Attraction in Madrid in Spain, or the organic trade event in Germany every year. So you can find partners there in the trade shows. Of course, it's also a place where you can promote your business. And yeah, finding trade partners, promoting your business goes hand in hand, obviously. Both offline on trade fairs, also online, where you have the platform Fresh Plaza, for example. It's one example, there are a few more. You have the business network platform LinkedIn that offer you the opportunity to promote your business and to also help you find clients. How does that work in practice? This is a print screen of Fresh Plaza. This is a promotional article. It is content on Fresh Plaza. It's an article about an exporter from Peru aiming the European markets. So it is an article with a lot of text, nice insights, interview, some pictures, etc. And the objective of such an article is to attract attention and to hopefully also um, attract potential buyers. Then the next is very interesting on LinkedIn. And LinkedIn is a place where you can have your personal profile. But if you are a professional company and aiming the European market, you should definitely also go for a company profile. And then this post is interesting. Here, Fresh Plaza and in LinkedIn meet a little bit. This person is posting on LinkedIn about the article on Fresh Plaza about the citrus season in Egypt. So the article is a little bit informative, gives background information, but of course, the article is also kind of a soft promotion of the company. Because often in these articles you have at the bottom of the article there's all the contact details of the company, including telephone number, website, etc. So LinkedIn, yeah, is for persons for where you can have a personal profile, professional profile, but also companies can have a profile and can have posts to promote the company. And certainly if you take exports to Europe or any international market seriously, you should have a presence on LinkedIn to promote your business and to improve your network. So if you are not saturated enough with the information I presented, there is, in the first place, the study on the Swedish market, the update that is published soon. But additional information is from OTGS counterparts like CBI, IPD. These are also organizations that promote trade from developing countries. CBI is an important one with a market information platform, and they have a dedicated section on exporting fresh fruits and vegetables. The German organization IPD has also market information available on the fresh produce sector. Then we have the ITC, the International Trade Center, which offers market statistics, which is offered on the platform I just forgot the name. ITC. Unbelievable. I have a little bit of a blackout, but they have a lot of market analysis tools. And they also have an SME Trade Academy, where they offer e-learning courses, export-related topics, and a lot of content that help you to develop your skills and help you to professionalize your business, your export operation. So, looking forward to the questions.
Yes, thank you so much, Werner. It was very, very interesting. We have gotten a few questions, so I will start. There's a question about how to find a reliable source for finding out the prices at wholesale here in Sweden, and where you would find that sort of information for the prices here in Sweden.
Wholesale. Yeah, there is not a single source that displays the wholesale prices for Sweden. What I can say, and the way we deal with this, the import price is available. You have the cost interest rate price, a price of the fruit when it arrives in Sweden in the harbor, and you can find the retail price, the shelf price, or the price displayed at the websites of the food service distributors. So, and there's a gap, and that is in that gap you should find the balance.
Yeah. Okay. Another question that we have here is what tools could guarantee the Swedish sort of buyers that the fruit and vegetable that they buy will come in good conditions? And I assume we're talking about certifications and stuff here. So maybe you can talk, yeah, about
Yeah,
the most important certifications, at least when it comes to the Swedish market.
yeah, global gap is definitely a precondition for exporting to certainly for the food retail sector. Further, the procedures for inspection and testing of the fruits and vegetables are very strict. So you really need to comply with the maximum residue level legislation. And for pesticides, that is key. So if you talk about the contract sales to Sweden, that is all done in advance.
Okay. Um, okay, and someone asked as well if there's a sort of a simple online platform to sort of follow the Swedish fruit and vegetable market. I mean, we have like we just did this, and it will be published soon. The sort of market study that you've already did, it will be published on our website soon. But if you have some other sort of online platform that you can follow the Swedish sort of market.
Yeah, it's a good question. I believe the best, if you talk about imports into Sweden, if you want to keep track of the imports by month, TradeMap. The source I forgot. The ITC source is TradeMap. TradeMap offers up-to-date import statistics. So you can, there's they are a little bit of 3 months behind. That's always the case anyway. So you can monitor imports to Sweden, import values and import volumes by month. So you can monitor, per product, per HS code. That would be my best answer. For the rest, CBI market information is very good on the EU level. For some countries also, but these are the main countries, and Sweden is often not in the top 6, so not in the main list of countries.
Okay. Then someone asked about finding business partners in Sweden, and maybe you can give some sort of recommendations for the companies that are listening now. If they want to start exporting to Sweden, where should they start?
Where should they start? It really depends. I would say try to visit trade fair, Fruit Logistica or Fruit Attraction, and get in touch with Swedish companies. So long list them. It's not a too long list, by the way, because if you talk about Germany or the Netherlands, there are many more buyers, but in Sweden, it is maybe between 10 and 20. Contact them in advance and try to make appointments to meet them on the trade fair. That would be the first step, I think.
Okay, thank you. And then I saw a question. Someone asked, is the Swedish market buying from importers in Netherlands, for example, for table grapes in this example, or can we have direct buyers in Sweden?
Absolutely. They do both. Um, the There was one slide in the beginning with the 5 bars for imports per year and with the origin. So EU origin and non-EU origin. The EU origin part was, to some extent, it is EU produced, but there's also a considerable part which is re-exports. So it is fruit and vegetables imported to Netherlands and then re-exported. So yeah, definitely. Like the case, the avocados we are showing here on the slide, they do not get to Sweden directly so much, but through other countries. Yes. And I believe that also goes for grapes.
Yeah, and I think that's a sort of important
Yeah.
thing to think
Yeah.
about, that when a lot of the things that we say come from maybe Netherlands don't originally come from Netherlands. They just comes to the
Yeah.
port in Netherlands and then they get transported to Sweden.
Yeah.
So it just
Yeah.
looks in the statistics that it's from Netherlands, but it's not really from there.
Yeah. Yeah, there's of course obviously an opportunity to get the direct sales in the Swedish market for these products, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we have one final question. Time for one final questions. Are there any rules or restrictions when it comes to packaging materials in Sweden?
For packaging and materials, right?
Well, the packaging material, like as one, the materials which packaging is in.
Yeah. 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 There are requirements. They are EU requirements. So the packaging for the carton board, there is some requirements, but I don't believe that is the most challenging part of it. You need to have a label on the box, of course, also with some elements, but that's not a big struggle too. The main thing is really about the fresh product itself. So contamination levels of pesticides, of heavy metals, these can be really challenging depending on the product, obviously. Certainly, if we talk about, for example, strawberries or grapes, that is a bottleneck. Other products like avocados may have a less struggle. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and I think one of the examples I can think about is a company that we work with in Ukraine, just to think about the packaging and important that, like Varney said, it's important that you go to Sweden if you want to export here. They were exporting biscuits, and in Ukraine, the biscuits is in a square, but in Sweden, it's always around. So those are sort of things you always need to find out before you start exporting, because and you won't really find out in statistics or anything. It will just be about biscuits.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think that was. Oh yeah, let's see what time it is. Okay, we have time for one last. Sorry, one last. Are there any import rules for freeze-dried or processed fruits, or is it the same as fresh fruits? Maybe you can answer that, or if you know about it.
Yeah, can you repeat it once again?
Are the import rules for freeze-dried, or in brackets
Yeah.
processed food, the same as fresh fruits?
Oh, for fresh versus processed.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, they are definitely different, I would say. Then processed, yeah, the question is, what does processed mean? In the basis, if we talk about frozen fruits and vegetables, then requirements are more or less similar to fresh.
Yeah.
talking about pesticide levels, because the frozen product remains relatively natural, and you do not dehydrate the product or something like that. If we are talking about like mango or dried mango, yeah, then you have the dehydration factor that comes in, which has a huge impact on the maximum residue level for pesticides. So how to determine that, and so that is definitely different. And also, then you have more requirements for packaging and labeling. So yeah, there are certainly different requirements. And um, for fresh products, you always come across the global gap. For processed, that is not the first requirement, because then you are more talking about the food safety management system requirements. But also in a supplying country, you have an origin and you have an orchard where the fruit is produced. So also these operations probably will need to comply with the global requirements, but that a lot is depending on the buyer in Europe
Yeah.
too.
Yeah, okay, good. I think that I'm just gonna give a last comment on just the freeze-dried thing. Freeze-dried, when it comes to freeze-dried things, it's not something we talk about here, but in general, it's usually a higher price point here in Sweden because it's a more expensive process to do. I think that's all the time we had. Thank you, Werner, so
Yeah,
much for
I'll
the.
ask Oscar, can I
Y-
add there?
Yes,
Because
of course.
I missed freeze dried, that they were that the question was really about
Yes.
freeze dried also. Yeah, for freeze dried goes a little bit the same as for the normal dried fruit. You struggle a little bit with how to determine the pesticide residue levels. But these that's that can be really challenging, because if you have pesticide residue in the freeze dried, yeah, but in then you have a problem. So you need to have certainly the samples tested very carefully, but that the Swedish buyer will take account of that. Because he's taking responsibility if he's importing freeze dried from any country in the world. So uh, but I know I was recently in contact with a freeze dried supplier from a Central Asian country, and they had the experience of exporting aiming to export to Germany, but the German buyer found out that there was one pesticide too high in the samples.
Okay. Well,
So
perfect, perfect. Sorry, Varna, I just wanted to
yeah,
uh, keep the time a little bit. But thank you so much
yeah,
for that information. And thank you everyone for attending the webinar. And hope we will publish the market study soon on our website. And I will give you write you an email to everyone who registered for this webinar when it's out. So thank you so much, and have a great continuous day.